On his lunch break, Winston returns to his meager flat in an apartment building where the electricity is often cut, the elevator doesn't work, and everything smells of cabbage. The building is named Victory Mansions. The main feature of Winston's flat is a telescreen, a device like a TV, except it can be dimmed but not turned off, and it transmits both ways. As long as he is within its field of vision, every sound is heard, every movement seen. Everything he says and does can be scrutinized. Winston moves to an alcove out of range of the telescreen and writes, April 4th, 1984. A monologue that has been running through his head pours onto the page. That morning at work, Winston had noticed two people during a daily ritual called 2 Minutes Hate. One was a dark-haired woman whom Winston instinctively disliked. The other was O'Brien, an important member of the inner party. Each day the focus of hate varies. That morning it had been Emmanuel Goldstein, an early betrayer of the party, referred to as the enemy of the people. Goldstein was shown on screen abusing Big Brother, shouting that the party's original goals had been betrayed, and advocating freedom of speech, the press, assembly, and thought. The crowd became increasingly fearful and vindictive as the program went on. When the program ended, Winston caught O'Brien's eye and sensed that O'Brien concurred with his contempt for the party. Winston reflects on that momentary glance exchanged with O'Brien and writes, "Down with Big Brother. It is thought crime. He will be vaporized." As he puts down his pen, someone knocks at the door. It is Mrs. Parsons at the door, not the ever-vigilant thought police. The building is dingy and falling apart. She asks Winston to fix her plumbing. As Winston works, the Parsons children menace Winston, shouting that he is a traitor and brandishing a toy gun. Winston reflects that children are horrible. Many denounce their own parents to the thought police. He remembers a dream he had years ago in which O'Brien said, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." And the memory causes him to feel a connection, good or bad, he doesn't know. A newsflash announces a success against the Eurasian army, and as the patriotic song "Oceana, 'Tis for Thee" resounds from the telescreen, bombs explode in the distance. As Winston listens, a flapping poster in the street causes the word "ingsoc," English socialism, to alternately appear and vanish. Returning to his diary, Winston wonders for whom he is writing, the past or future. He knows he will die for his rebellion. Writing is rebellion. So to stay alive as long as he can, he washes the ink off his hands. Winston feels guilty when he recalls his mother. He regrets that he did not treat her well and that she disappeared before he could make amends. The responsibility and his nostalgia for that relationship are examples of old think or illegal memories of a time prior to the revolution. Suddenly the telescreen calls him to calisthenics, and as Winston exercises, he cannot remember for sure a time when Oceana had not been at war. He vaguely remembers the surprise of the atomic bomb and the scurrying of citizens into the subway stations. Although Winston remembers that Oceana had once been allied with Eurasia, the party line is that Oceana had always been at war with them. Winston reflects that if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes accepted as truth. Notice what is said here. Reality control. Newspeak. Doublethink. A voice from the telescreen screams that Winston is not exercising vigorously enough. Winston hides his emotions so as not to give away his disdain for the party. The ministry employs swarms of workers to delete unpersons from texts, rewrite poems that have become ideologically offensive, recall and burn books and fake photographs. Sometimes facts, statistics, or a person have to be created to fill a hole in a story. Winston likes this work because it allows for some creativity. The Ministry of Truth also creates entertainment for the proles, almost nothing except sport, crime, films oozing with sex. The proles are not a threat to the party, but there are many of them, so they are distracted with entertainment such as alcohol, pornography, and gambling. Winston is in the canteen, lunchroom, at work when his coworker Syme joins him. Syme is working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. The purpose of this dictionary is to eliminate words from the language, thereby reducing the range of possible thoughts and thus limiting people's consciousness. Syme says that reading classic literature will be impossible one day. Even having a conversation like Syme and Winston are having will be impossible. Party slogans will have to change. Syme explains by saying, "How could you have a slogan like 'freedom is slavery' when the concept of freedom has been abolished?" They overhear a conversation at another table. The man isn't expressing a single original thought. He's parroting what he's been spoon-fed. Duck speak, Syme calls it. And he notes that it has two contradictory meanings. It can be an insult or praise. Winston thinks Syme is too intelligent to survive. He reads too much, thinks too deeply, and says things he shouldn't. One day, Winston is sure, he'll be vaporized. Mr. Parsons, who also works at the Ministry of Truth, approaches the two, bragging about how his daughter turned a man over to the thought police. Just then, an announcement from the Ministry of Plenty touts production increases in everything from food to helicopters, and the reader considers that the ministry's name is another example of doublethink. Winston knows the reality: scarcity of just about everything and general bleakness in daily life. But he also knows that memories have been toyed with. Why should anyone feel that life is intolerable if they can't remember that anything had once been different? As everyone listens to the announcement, the dark-haired girl is looking at Winston, hoping her glances will not be noticed. But Winston does notice and is filled with fear. He worries his facial expression, or face crime, might give him away. A piercing whistle signals time to return to work. Winston is writing in his journal about a time when he had hired a prostitute. The practice is forbidden, but even if Winston had been caught, the sentence would have been light, maybe only 5 years in a forced labor camp. The party says sexual urges occasionally need to be indulged, as long as the sex is joyless. Sex is discouraged except to produce children. Couples have to get party approval to marry, and those who seem attracted to each other are always denied. The party is trying to kill human instincts, and if the sexual instinct can't be killed, at least the act should be considered dirty and unpleasant. Winston recalls that the prostitute was old and toothless, and that the experience had been dreadful. He hopes that in writing it down he will be purged of it, but it doesn't work. Winston is in fact married to a woman named Catherine. His estranged wife is a party hack incapable of an original thought, but divorce is unlawful and separation discouraged. However, after 15 months, the marriage became intolerable, so they were allowed to separate. It has been almost 11 years since Winston has seen Catherine. Winston might have stuck with her, except that sexual intercourse with her was like embracing a jointed wooden image. Winston compares her to a vulgar old prostitute. Catherine had insisted on intercourse once a week because she viewed it as their duty to the party, but Winston couldn't stand that idea. The narrator says that organizations like the Junior Anti-Sex League, of which the dark-haired girl, Julia, is a member, are so successful in convincing party women that sex is ugly that they believe it. Yet Winston wants to feel love and to destroy the wall of virtue that controls sex and other connections between human beings. If there is hope, Winston writes, it lies in the proles. Winston is reflecting on the proletariat or working class, which makes up 85% of Oceania's population. He believes that only a rising up of the wretched, disregarded majority can overthrow the party. In his alcove, he takes out a children's history book loaned to him by Mrs. Parsons. He copies a passage that describes the horrors of capitalism. He wonders how much of what he is copying is true. Winston thinks back to the one time he held in his hand proof that the party history is not true. Back in the 1960s, many original leaders of the revolution were declared traitors. Many others were killed. A few went into hiding, including Goldstein. 3 men who survived were Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford. The 3 confessed and were temporarily paroled. Winston had seen them once at the Chestnut Tree Cafe. 5 years later, a photograph came across Winston's desk rolled inside another piece of paper. He shouldn't have seen it. It showed the 3 at a party function in New York on the date on which the 3 had confessed to having been on enemy soil. Here was something he could hold on to. Proof positive that the party did lie about history. He did not, of course, hold on to it, but he also never forgot it. Winston begins questioning his sanity. Even though his job entails revising documents, something tells him that history should not be alterable. The party believes it is. If he is right, Winston wonders, and the party is wrong, does that make him crazy? Winston wanders into the slums of London. After narrowly escaping a rocket bomb, he sees a severed hand on the street and kicks it to the gutter. As he strolls past a pub, he sees a very old man. Winston decides he might remember life before the revolution. So he follows the man into the pub, buys him a beer, and asks him to compare his life as a boy with now. The man is eager to talk, but can't stay on track. Winston leaves the pub and finds himself at the junk shop where he'd purchased his diary. It seemed spooky. Oddly, late as it is, the shop is still open, so he goes in. The proprietor lets him look around, and Winston buys a glass paperweight with coral inside it. The proprietor, Mr. Charrington, invites Winston to see more antiques in an upstairs room. They climb the stairs, and the room conjures vague memories. On the wall is a picture of an old church, St. Clement's, and Mr. Charrington recites part of a children's rhyme that includes its name. Near the end is the ominous line, "Here comes a chopper to chop off your head." There is no telescreen in this room, and Winston believes he could be alone and secure here. He considers risking renting it for a few dollars a month. As he leaves the shop, he sees the dark-haired girl from the Ministry of Truth and wonders if she is spying on him. While walking home, Winston considers the fact they always come for you at night. He recalls O'Brien's words, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." 4 days after Winston's visit to the junk shop, the dark-haired girl passes him in the hall at work and slips a piece of paper into his hand. Back at his desk, Winston places it among other papers so he can read it without detection. Worrying that it's from the thought police, but hoping it might be from the rebel group the Brotherhood, he reads it. It is handwritten and reads, "I love you." Home in bed, Winston considers the note, and because of how agitated the girl was when she handed it to him, he's sure she means it. The two eventually meet in the canteen and fixed a meeting place and time without looking at each other. Victory Square at 19 hours. When she arrives, a passing convoy of Eurasian prisoners draws a mass of people to the square. Forcing themselves into the crowd, they're at last shoulder to shoulder. She asks him to take Sunday afternoon off, and he agrees. She outlines a complicated route for him to follow and says to meet at 15 hours. She gives his hand a quick squeeze. He studies every detail of her hand. Needing to remain undetected, neither looks at the other as they part. Winston and Julia meet in the shade of bushes, away from telescreens and hidden microphones. Winston steps into pools of gold, walks across ground that is misty with bluebells, and listens to a bird with a speckled breast singing. Despite the privacy of their surroundings, they keep their voices low. Julia, whose name readers finally learn, is 15 years younger than Winston, but is attracted to him because she's detected that he also hates the party. The party wants sexual relations to be free of desire, so the couple's sexual attraction becomes political, and their climax is a victory. "Never go home the same way as you went out," Julia says as they part. The next time they make love, it is in the belfry of a ruined church. Usually, however, they only get to talk in what they call installments. If, as they talk, the thought police draw near, Winston and Julia separate and pick up with the same sentence the next day. Being only 26, Julia has no memories of anything prior to the 1960s. As a young girl, she'd been a member of SPIES, the Youth League, and the Junior Anti-Sex League. She still wears the garb of the Anti-Sex League, but now it's a ruse. Winston is back in the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. He's rented it long-term. At the front of the hearth are an oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups. In the weeks they've been together, Winston's physical desire for Julia has turned into a deeper affection, and he's doing his best to make the shabby little room a romantic getaway. Julia arrives with real coffee, real sugar, and other treats. She wears makeup and perfume, so she'll feel like a woman in this room. They make love and fall asleep. Julia sees a rat when she wakes up. Unfazed, she tosses a shoe at it and starts to describe what rats do to their babies. But Winston is in a panic. It reminds him of a dream of something too dreadful for him to face. Julia asks about the paperweight and the picture of St. Clement's Church on the wall. Winston recites a verse from the rhyme about it, and to his astonishment, she finishes the rhyme. As the evening ends, Winston contemplates the paperweight. Winston figured that Syme would disappear one day, and he has. His name has been removed from lists, and he has therefore become an unperson. People work over. Winston is back in the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. He's rented it long-term. At the front of the hearth are an oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups. In the weeks they've been together, Winston's physical desire for Julia has turned into a deeper affection, and he's doing his best to make the shabby little room a romantic getaway. Julia arrives with real coffee, real sugar, and other treats. She wears makeup and perfume, so she'll feel like a woman in this room. They make love and fall asleep. Julia sees a rat when she wakes up. Unfazed, she tosses a shoe at it and starts to describe what rats do to their babies. But Winston is in a panic. It reminds him of a dream of something too dreadful for him to face. Julia asks about the paperweight and the picture of St. Clement's Church on the wall. Winston recites a verse from the rhyme about it, and to his astonishment, she finishes the rhyme. As the evening ends, Winston contemplates the paperweight. Winston figured that Syme would disappear one day, and he has. His name has been removed from lists, and he is therefore become an unperson. People work overtime in preparation for Hate Week and are drawn into a patriotic frenzy. Rocket bombs kill hundreds, leading to demonstrations against Goldstein. Julia wonders if it's the party dropping the bombs just to keep the people frightened. Winston and Julia meet several times in June in their room. Sometimes Winston believes the Brotherhood exists and considers active rebellion. Julia, however, finds the idea absurd. She agrees that O'Brien may be with the Brotherhood, but to her, the only sensible thing to do is engage in secret disobedience, as they are in the room. As Winston walks along a corridor at the ministry, O'Brien lays a friendly hand on his arm. He'd been reading one of Winston's articles and looking for a chance to talk. He praises the article but points out that Winston used two obsolete words and refers him to the 10th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. The 10th edition hasn't been published yet, but O'Brien says he has one and Winston may borrow it. He gives Winston his address on a slip of paper and suggests that Winston come by. Borrowing this book wouldn't be considered illegal activity. Winston awakens from a dream that took place inside the paperweight. The dream was of the early days of the Revolution, when his family lived in a small room. His father had disappeared some time before, and the child Winston greedily took all of the chocolate his family, now just his small sister and mother, had been rationed. He ran away from them, and when he returned, his family was gone. He tells Julia he had always thought that he murdered his mother. Julia comes fully awake when Winston says aloud, "The proles are human beings, we are not human." He believes that emotions make people human, and because party members are without emotions, they are already dead. He decides they should part. If she stays clear of him, she can survive. She decides to do whatever he does, even if that means rebellion. They decide that if the party makes them confess, their feelings will not change. The real betrayal, Winston says, would be to make them stop loving each other. He thinks the party can't do that. Having come by different routes, Winston and Julia arrived at O'Brien's apartment in a part of town where the wealthy inner party members live. Everything is clean, plush, and spacious, and inner party members can turn off the telescreens for up to half an hour at a time. O'Brien seems irritable, and Winston wonders if he misunderstood the invitation. He doubts for a moment that O'Brien is with the resistance. O'Brien turns off the telescreen, smiles, and offers an invitation for Winston to speak. Winston says that he and Julia want to join the resistance. O'Brien explains that his valet, Martin, is one of us, and has the man bring them wine. O'Brien has them raise a glass, and they toast Emmanuel Goldstein. Testing their resolve to overthrow the party, O'Brien asks a series of grisly questions, including if they're prepared to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face. Winston and Julia answer yes to each question until O'Brien asks if they're prepared to never see each other again. To this, Julia answers no. O'Brien explains other rules of the Brotherhood, and Julia leaves. He asks Winston if they have a hiding place, so Winston tells him of the room over Mr. Charrington's shop. O'Brien says he will get a copy of Goldstein's book soon. and Winston leaves. Winston is now in possession of the book, Goldstein's Manifesto. But outside, banners, speeches, parades, and displays of weapons have worked citizens into a frenzy against the enemy, despite being unaware that the enemy has changed within minutes. Oceania had been at war with Eurasia, but now it's Eastasia, and according to the party, it has always been Eastasia. The revamping of history means overtime work at the Ministry of Truth. Even though Winston knows that everything he creates is false, he tackles it with imagination and enthusiasm. At the end of 6 days, it's impossible for anyone to prove that the war with Eurasia ever happened, and the workers at the Ministry of Truth get an afternoon off. Winston takes this chance to go to the room above the shop, where he finally has a chance to read the book. When Julia awakens, she wonders why the stove's gone out, because she'd made sure the oil had been full before going to sleep. It had gotten cold, and she can't make coffee. Winston goes to the window and listens to the woman singing in the yard. While he thinks of her as fat and ugly, it also strikes him that she is beautiful. Winston realizes that people all over the world are the same. While they've been separated by hatred and lies, a race of conscious beings is sure to arise. "We are the dead," he says out loud. Julia repeats his words, and then, from behind them, they hear the words again, this time by the thought police. They are caught. The woman in the yard stops singing, and there is the sound of the washtub being thrown across the yard, along with a yell of pain. Men in black uniforms stampede into the room. As ordered, Winston and Julia turn back to back and hear trampling. The paperweight is smashed to pieces, and Julia is punched in the chest. She lands on the floor, struggling for breath, before being brutally carried out of the room. Just as Winston wonders if they caught Mr. Charrington as well, he walks into the room, much changed. He's a member of the thought police and has trapped Winston and Julia with the illusion of privacy in the room. Winston is in a cell. He believes he's in the Ministry of Love. A hungry ache in his belly never goes away. He imagines what will happen to him, the smash of truncheons on his body, begging for mercy from the floor. Sometimes he thinks of Julia, and for a time believes he'd double his pain if it would take some from her. He doesn't know where she is. Winston's one hope is that O'Brien will save him, or that the Brotherhood will get a razor blade to him. Others arrive. Ampleforth, Winston's co-worker and a poet. His neighbor, Parsons, a mean-looking man with a face as thin as a skull. When the starving, skull-faced man is told to go to room 101, he begs for anything but that. Eventually, the door opens. It is O'Brien. "They've got you too," Winston cries, only to find out that O'Brien is with Big Brother. "They got me a long time ago," O'Brien says. O'Brien comes in with a guard, who now slams a truncheon into Winston's elbow, and everything explodes in pain. Winston is in a cell, drifting in and out of consciousness because of endless interrogations and beatings. He confesses to all kinds of things he's never done. Hallucinations begin, and he imagines O'Brien there. Eventually, O'Brien really is there. He hooks Winston to a machine, which can inflict pain on a scale from 0 to 100. The pain can be increased or decreased depending on Winston's answers. O'Brien is reprogramming Winston's mind so that he believes the party's truth of the moment, that history's never been revised, and that when he holds up 4 fingers, he's holding up 5. O'Brien explains that it is not the party's goal to destroy heretics, but to convert them, because it is intolerable to the party to allow individual thought to exist. Thus, they must torture and interrogate a person until everything is dead inside, and the person is free of emotions. O'Brien tells Winston that he collaborated in writing the book, and goes on to give Winston the answer to the question of why. Winston says what he thinks O'Brien wants to hear, that the party is ruling the people for their own good. O'Brien dials up the pain threshold. Wrong. O'Brien goes on to explain, we are not interested in the good of others, we are interested solely in power. The party slogan, "Freedom is slavery," is also reversible. Slavery is freedom. O'Brien continues to explain party doctrine, alternately dialing up and dialing down the level of pain according to how well Winston's answers agree or disagree, not with what Winston believes, but with the party tenets. O'Brien wants to make Winston a parrot of the party. Nonetheless, Winston continues to hold tight to ideas he knows to be true. Gravity exists. The Earth has existed for millions of years. The stars are millions of light years away. And the party will one day fail. When Winston sees himself in a mirror, he is frightened by the emaciation of his body. The one thing that sustains him is that in his heart he has not betrayed Julia. He has not stopped loving her, and O'Brien knows it. Winston has been made more comfortable in his cell. He can eat and bathe, and the painful varicose ulcer he had since Book 1 has been dressed. He's trying to re-educate himself. After reading Goldstein's manifesto, he had decided that sanity was not statistical. Now he agrees that it is, and that it's just a question of accepting the party's truth until it changes, of course. The past was alterable, however, it has never been altered. Doublethink. Even so, occasionally some thought comes into his head that needs to be pushed away. Crime stop is the newspeak term. But something bursts through, and Winston finds himself calling aloud for Julia. O'Brien comes into his cell and tells him that intellectually he's cured, but emotionally he isn't. Always able to detect a lie, he asks Winston what his true feelings are toward Big Brother. Winston tells him, "I hate him." At that, O'Brien tells the guards to take him to room 101. Winston is taken to room 101, many meters underground. He's strapped to a chair so tightly that he can't move his head. O'Brien tells him that room 101 is different for each person. What happens there is the worst thing that the person can imagine, and for Winston that means rats. O'Brien shows Winston a mask that looks like the kind a fencer wears, with a fine mesh covering for the face. This mask, however, has 2 compartments. Winston's face fits in one compartment, and there are 2 hungry sewer rats in the other. There is a door at the front that O'Brien can open. The mask is coming closer to Winston. Terrified, he calls out, "Do it to Julia! Not me! Julia!" Winston loses consciousness and hears a sound in the darkness. It is the cage door clicking shut, not open. Winston sits in his usual corner of the Chestnut Tree Cafe. Gin is his life now, his death and resurrection. He's listening to the telescreen, awaiting a bulletin about a battle between Oceania and Eurasia. Winston is worried because he thinks the news will be bad. As he plays chess, he traces the equation 2 + 2 = 5 in the dust. Winston knows now that the party can get inside people after all. In a flashback, the narrator reveals that Winston and Julia had run into each other once after being released. The thought police didn't care about them now, so the two could have talked, even made love. But both were so completely changed that they didn't care about each other. Before they parted, they admitted that they had betrayed each other. They pretended they would meet again, but neither actually cared enough to do so. Winston has been promoted to a new job at the Ministry of Truth, working on the newest edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. He still has memories of an earlier time, even of his childhood, but he pushes them out of his mind. After all, he knows now that they're false. On the telescreen, the announcer says that Oceania won the battle. There is cheering in the street, and Winston is relieved. He has a waking dream in which he's back in the Ministry of Love and has been forgiven. As Winston walks down the hall, the narrator explains that finally the long-hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. He looks up at the face of Big Brother and wonders why he had ever rebelled against that loving face.